August 12, 1944. The Loire River Valley, south-central France, where the river runs wide and slow in the August heat between its sandy banks, and where the stone towns of the valley have been under German occupation since June 1940. 4 years, long enough for the population to know the occupying army's habits, and long enough to recognize when those habits have changed, in ways that indicate something fundamental has shifted. A German garrison commander in the town of Vendôme, 100 miles southwest of Paris, has received no orders from his corps headquarters in 4 days, and outside his command post, the French civilians are beginning to gather. The commander is not besieged. His garrison of approximately 600 men is intact, armed, and capable of the kind of defensive action that would cost any attacking force real casualties. The kind of defense that the German military's training has been building since 1939 into the specific and professional reflexes of men who know how to use their weapons and their positions and the terrain of a fortified town to make an attacker pay for every block they advance. But there is no attacking force outside the command post. There are no American tanks on the roads into Vendôme. There are no fighter bombers circling overhead to mark the approach of an armored column. There is no radio contact with higher headquarters, not with the 1st Army's Rear Area Command, not with Army Group B's operations section, not with the divisional headquarters that was 2 links up the command chain and that has not responded to any transmission since August 8th. There are no orders, not to hold, not to withdraw north toward the remaining German lines, not to destroy the local bridge, not to report the garrison's current status, not to do anything that the orders that should be arriving would tell a German garrison commander to do in this situation. There is only the silence of a command chain whose communications have been severed by the specific and catastrophic operational collapse that Patton's Third Army has been producing in the German Army's rear areas since August 1, when the Third Army's activation and the subsequent Avranches breakout began turning the French interior into a void that German units are disappearing into without anyone on the German side having the operational information or the communications capacity to know exactly where those units are or what has happened to them. The French civilians outside the command post are not armed. They are not threatening. They are simply there, watching, gathering in the way that a population watches a power that is visibly failing, the way that crowds gather at the edges of events whose direction has become clear to everyone, except possibly the people at the center. The garrison commander looks at the faces outside his window, the French civilians of Vendôme who have been living under German occupation since 1940, and who know, in the way that an occupied population learns to read the signs of an occupying power's condition, that the condition has changed in ways that the garrison's intact equipment and armed soldiers do not fully describe. He looks at the radio that has been transmitting into silence for 4 days, transmitting on the scheduled frequencies and the emergency frequencies and any frequency that the radio operator has been able to try, receiving in return the static of channels that are either not being monitored or are monitoring but have nothing to send. He looks at the ammunition count that his supply officer has submitted and at the food supply that will sustain the garrison for another 3 weeks, and at the fuel that would move his vehicles if there were somewhere to move them to. Everything is there. Nothing is connected. He makes the decision that the German military law says is punishable by death, the law that the Wehrmacht penal code and the Nazi political command's increasingly violent enforcement apparatus have been applying to German commanders who surrender without authorization since Stalingrad, and that the situation, in its specific and complete abandonment of him by the chain of command that should be providing the authorization or the information or the orders that would make continued resistance meaningful, has made the only decision that the evidence supports: the war, for this garrison, is over. He sends an officer outside, under a white flag. The white flag is met not by an American unit. There is no American unit within operational reach of Vendôme on August 12, the nearest Third Army element being 60 miles to the north, and moving east rather than south, but by a group of FFI partisans armed with the weapons that the resistance has been accumulating since the Allied supply drops began in 1943, and by the town's mayor, Who has been waiting for this moment since June 1940, and who accepts the surrender with the specific and dignified formality of a French official conducting the most significant administrative act of his career? The surrender is conducted in the town square of Vendôme in the August afternoon. The German garrison files out and stacks its weapons and stands in the organized formation that the German military's discipline maintains, even in the act of capitulation. And the French civilians of Vendôme watch in the silence that the weight of 4 years of occupation and this moment of its ending together produce. Patton's nearest unit is 60 miles away. The unit that has produced this surrender is not American. It is the operational momentum of the Third Army's advance, transmitted through the French interior as a psychological force that has accomplished what direct military pressure had not yet been applied to accomplish. The events in the Loire Valley in August 1944 are the most remarkable mass surrender in the French campaign. More remarkable in their specific operational character and in what they reveal about the relationship between military will and military context than any of the forced surrenders produced by direct American military action, because the surrenders happen without the direct American military action that military theory has always projected as the necessary precondition for the capitulation of organized military forces. They happen without the assault, without the siege, without the accumulation of physical and psychological pressure that military history from Thucydides to the German General Staff's own doctrine identifies as the mechanism through which military surrender is produced. They happen because of what Patton's Third Army has done to the concept of the German rear area in the French interior, has dissolved it, converted it from the organized logistical and administrative space that a military operation requires for its rear area, to function into a void whose specific and disorienting character the isolated German garrison commanders and rearguard units cannot navigate without the command connections and the information flow and the operational orders that the void has consumed along with everything else. The German units in the Loire Valley in August 1944 are not surrendering because they have been defeated in battle. They are surrendering because they have been made irrelevant by a form of defeat so complete that it has bypassed them entirely, has driven past them at the speed of Patton's armored columns without stopping to engage them, and has left them in the specific and untenable situation of military units that have been functionally neutralized without having been physically reduced. General George S. Patton's Third Army has been operational for 11 days when the Loire Valley surrenders begin. Activated on August 1 at Avranches, in the specific operational context of a German defensive system that has been cracking since the end of July under the combined pressure of the Cobra breakout and the Goodwood fighting. The Third Army has been pursuing the specific and audacious operational concept that Patton has been developing since the Louisiana maneuvers of 1941, and that he has been refining through North Africa and Sicily and the enforced inactivity of the slapping controversy's aftermath and the Fusag deception. The exploitation of a breakthrough at the maximum possible depth and speed, the conversion of a tactical breakthrough into an operational envelopment whose success is measured not in ground taken, but in German formations bypassed, cut off, and destroyed as organized military forces, without the requirement for the direct engagement that the German army's tactical training has been designed to manage. The conversion of a tactical breakthrough into an operational envelopment before the German defensive system can reconstitute the coherent defensive line that would force the American advance back into the set-piece battle that the German army has been trained to fight, and that Patton has been trained to avoid. The Third Army's operational method is not the methodical advance that the pre-war Allied planning had described as the appropriate response to the German defensive capability, not the step-by-step advance that consolidates each tactical gain before proceeding to the next, not the careful reduction of each defensive position before moving forward, not the methodical accumulation of material advantage that eventually makes the German defensive position untenable. It is the armored exploitation whose specific and aggressive character, moving faster than the German command system can process the information about what is happening, moving deeper than the German defensive reserve can be repositioned to counter-commit against, turning flanks that the German defensive position cannot cover, because covering every point of a rapidly expanding encirclement requires more force than the German army in France has available in August 1944, has been built into the Third Army's operational culture since August 1, and is producing, in the Loire Valley's German garrisons, the effects that the operational theory predicts. The paralysis of isolated units whose command connections have been severed by an advance that has simply moved past them, and whose institutional and psychological capacity for independent action, without orders, the German military's specific cultural relationship to command authority, has not developed in the way that a different organizational culture might have. The geographic context of the Loire Valley's German position in August 1944 makes the surrender dynamic comprehensible in terms that the German garrison commanders themselves would have recognized if they had been able to step outside the operational situation and assess it with the analytical distance that the operational situation's complete consumption of their attention makes impossible from the inside. The Loire River runs east-west across central France, a major geographical feature approximately 150 miles south of the Normandy battlefront's August 1 position. 150 miles that represented, in the operational planning that the German army in France had been conducting since the Allied landings in June, a significant buffer between the fighting front and the administrative and logistical territory that the German military occupation had been managing in central France. The German defensive concept for France has placed the Loire as a southern boundary of the operational area, whose defense the German army in France has been organized to conduct, a boundary whose function is to define the southern limit of the space within which German military operations are expected to occur, and south of which the German military presence is primarily administrative, logistical, and security-oriented, rather than combat-oriented. The German units in the Loire Valley in August 1944 are not there as a combat force organized to resist a major American advance, not positioned, not equipped, not trained for the specific mission of stopping an armored exploitation at the operational depth the Third Army is achieving. They are there as the administrative and logistical tail of a military organization whose combat elements are 150 miles to the north, fighting the Normandy battle, the supply depot guards, the communications troops, the military administration staff, the rear area security units, and the miscellaneous garrison detachments whose function in the German military's organizational architecture is the maintenance of order in the occupied territory and the protection of the logistical infrastructure that feeds the combat front. These are not the same soldiers as the men of the Fallschirmjäger divisions or the SS Panzer Corps. They are the soldiers whose function the military organization requires, but whose training and equipment and psychological preparation has been oriented toward the administrative challenges of occupation, rather than the combat challenges of defending against a modern armored army driving at 40 miles per day. When the Third Army's exploitation drives south and east of Avranches at the speed that August 1944's operational record documents, 40 miles on August 3rd, 30 miles on August 4th, 25 miles on August 5, in a pace whose daily accumulation is converting the map of France into the record of an advance whose historical parallel is the French campaign's opening weeks in 1940, it does not drive through the Loire Valley's German units. It drives around them and past them, converting their administrative role into an irrelevance whose implications the units have no command framework left to process. August 8, 1944. The Third Army's 12th Corps under General Manton Eddy is driving south from Avranches toward Le Mans, with the 4th Armored Division in the lead, its Shermans and M3 half-tracks, and the column of armored vehicles stretching for miles along the French departmental roads, in the specific and visceral image of an armored exploitation at full operational pace, the dust rising in columns from the summer roads that have not seen rain in 2 weeks, the engines at road speed, and the diesel exhaust mixing with the dust into the specific smell of armored column at pace that the French farmland has not experienced since 1940, the lead vehicles already well past the towns that the column's tail is still entering, and the town's French inhabitants watching from the roadside, with the specific silence of people watching something whose outcome is already determined. The 16th Corps' 90th Infantry Division moves on the flank, the infantry formations covering the ground that the armor bypasses in the way that the exploitation plan has designed. Armor at the tip, infantry following to secure what the armor leaves behind. The pace that the Third Army's operational culture has been establishing since activation is 30 to 40 miles per day in the exploitation phase, a pace whose momentum the German rear area organization in the Loire sector has no capacity to interrupt because the rear area organization has not been designed as a combat force, and because the pace itself is part of the disruption, moving faster than the German system can process the information that the movement generates. The 4th Armored Division under General John Wood is the instrument whose operational character has been most fully shaped by Patton's exploitation philosophy. Speed, depth, the deliberate bypassing of positions that would slow the column, the subordination of the tactical detail to the operational objective, whose achievement at speed is the entire purpose of the armored exploitation. Le Mans falls on August 8th, its German garrison of approximately 3,000 men, having received the specific and traumatic operational experience of watching the American armored column bypass the city's outer defenses and drive into the center at 40 kilometers per hour, in the specific and visceral way of armored exploitation at full operational pace. The column not stopping, not deploying into the assault formation that the German garrison's training has told it to expect from an attacking force approaching a defended city, simply moving through the city in the way that the 4th Armored Division's operational culture has been establishing since August 1. The objective is not this city, the objective is past this city, and the time spent in this city is time the objective is not being reached. The German garrison at Le Mans does not fight its way out in the organized breakout operation that its strength and its equipment would theoretically support. It does not conduct the organized withdrawal north toward the remaining German lines, whose planning would have required the communication with higher headquarters, that the higher headquarters, consumed with the operational catastrophe that the Avranches breakout is producing simultaneously across its entire front, is too occupied with its own institutional survival to provide. A portion of it surrenders, a portion scatters, a portion simply stops being a military unit in the functional sense, dissolving into the civilian landscape as individuals whose military identity has been stripped by the specific operational experience of being in a city that an armored column just drove through without stopping to fight them. The near failure in the German rear area's attempt to maintain organizational coherence in the Loire Valley, the moment when the German command system comes closest to successfully re-establishing the contact that would have allowed it to impose some form of organized direction on the isolated units, arrives in the second week of August, when Army Group B's communications section makes a systematic attempt to re-establish contact with the isolated units in the Loire and Vendôme sectors through the emergency radio protocols that the German Army's communication doctrine prescribes for exactly this contingency, the loss of normal command communications with forward or encircled units, requiring the use of the alternate frequencies and the special encryption protocols that are supposed to maintain the minimum command connection even when the primary communication infrastructure has been disrupted. The attempt produces partial results on August 11th, when contact is established with the headquarters of the German First Army's Rear Area Command at Poitiers. Contact established on an emergency frequency, maintained for approximately 40 minutes before the link degrades, and long enough to transmit the order that Poitiers is to be held as a defensive position, and that the Loire Valley garrisons are to organize a defensive line on the south bank of the Loire River to contain the American advance and provide a coherent defensive anchor for the German Army's reconstitution effort south of the Loire. The order reaches Poitiers. It reaches the Poitiers headquarters staff, who record it and begin the process of transmitting it down the command chain to the Loire Valley garrisons, whose compliance would give it operational meaning. It does not reach the Loire Valley garrisons. The radio relay link that would have transmitted it from the Poitiers headquarters to the individual garrison commanders has been severed, cut by the Third Army's advance through the communications infrastructure of the French interior, in the specific and undirected way that an armored exploitation severs communication links. Not by targeting them, but by moving through the geographic areas where they exist, and severing them as a byproduct of the movement rather than as a purpose of it. The relay stations are in buildings on roads that the American columns have been using. The telephone lines run along roads that the American columns have been moving along. The physical communication infrastructure whose continuity the German command system requires has been cut with the casual indifference of a force that does not need what it is destroying and does not know what it is denying. The order exists in the record of Army Group B's communications log. It has been transmitted from Army Group B's communications section to the Poitiers rear area headquarters, and from there into the communication channels that lead to the Loire Valley garrisons. Transmitted in the specific and professional way of a military command system that is still performing its organizational functions, still following its protocols, still maintaining the institutional forms of command and communication, even as the operational situation that gives those functions their meaning is dissolving around it. It does not arrive. The communication channels between Poitiers and the Loire Valley garrisons are the same channels that the Third Army's advance has been severing since August 8th, and the order travels until it reaches the point where the channel ends and stops there, in the silence of a frequency that no one in the Loire Valley is receiving. The garrison commanders in Vendôme and Blois and Orléans and Bourges and the other Loire Valley towns where German units have been waiting for instructions since August 8th continue waiting. The instructions are theoretically on their way. They are practically inaccessible. The order that would have given the garrison commanders a framework for their decision, hold, withdraw, destroy, and evacuate, do anything that connects their situation to the command authority that makes military action meaningful, is in transit on a communication channel that ceased to function 4 days ago. By August 16, the pattern of surrender without combat contact is established across the Loire Valley in the specific and documented way that the French Regional Resistance Command's reports and the Third Army's G2 section's intelligence summaries will later reconstruct from the individual accounts of FFI commanders and the after-action reports of American units that eventually moved through the valley. German garrison units ranging from company to regimental size, isolated in their garrison towns along the Loire's north and south banks, receiving no orders from the command chain above them, are watching the Third Army's operational progress, not from the direct experience of combat contact with American forces, but from the radio news that French civilians are sharing with them in some cases, from the BBC broadcasts in French whose reliability the garrison commanders have learned to assess against their own operational knowledge, from the columns of French refugees and retreating German logistical elements moving east, whose direction of movement indicates what is happening to the west and north, and from the growing confidence of the FFI units in their sector, a confidence whose expression in the faces and the bearing of the resistance members who are visible from the garrison perimeters is the most immediate and most accurate intelligence about the operational situation that the garrison commanders have access to. The FFI activity in the Loire Valley in August 1944 is not primarily a combat activity in the sense of armed resistance groups engaging German military forces in the sustained firefights that the word resistance might suggest. It is an intelligence and psychological activity whose effectiveness in August 1944 is precisely proportional to the German unit's isolation and disorientation. The FFI can tell the isolated garrison commander things about his own situation that the German command system cannot tell him, because the FFI is connected to the French resistance network that extends across the valley, and to the BBC broadcasts in French that the resistance has been using as its primary reliable information source since 1940, and to the civilian population's daily observation of what is happening on the roads and at the bridges and in the towns through which the operational picture is visible to anyone who is watching. The German garrison commander is connected to nothing. His radio is receiving static. His telephone lines are cut. His courier routes are through territory where the French population's sympathy for his mission has always been theoretical and is now, in August 1944, actively hostile. The FFI's information about the Third Army's position and direction and operational pace, assembled from the French resistance network that has been systematically tracking American movements since August 1, through the reports of farmers and railway workers and school teachers and shopkeepers along the routes the American columns have been using, is more accurate and more current than anything the German command system has been able to provide to the isolated garrison since the communications were severed on August 8. This is the specific and operationally consequential inversion at the heart of the Loire Valley surrenders. The defeated resistance knows more than the victorious occupier about what is happening in the occupier's own military theater. August 18, 1944. Orléans, Loire Valley. The German garrison of Orléans, approximately 2,400 men, the largest single German force in the Loire sector, holding the bridge city, whose crossings over the Loire have made it the administrative center of the German occupation of this part of central France, and whose defensive potential, in a garrison commander with orders and communications, and a mission that connected his defense to something larger than the garrison itself, would be real and substantial. The garrison is commanded by a colonel, whose name the available records do not preserve with certainty. The post-liberation French administrative records and the FFI reports give inconsistent designations, but whose professional predicament is preserved with clarity in the FFI reports of his communications with the resistance leadership in the days before the surrender. The garrison has been engaged in what the historical record describes as negotiations. Though the word understates the one-sidedness of an exchange in which one party has complete information about the operational situation, and the other party has been trying to construct a picture of that situation from the static of a radio that stopped receiving on August 10th. The FFI commander for the Orléans sector, operating with the intelligence provided by the resistance network and with the specific and practical advantage of knowing that no German relief column is coming, because no German relief column exists in the operational area, has been communicating to the garrison commander the specific and documented fact of the Third Army's position and trajectory. The Third Army is at Chartres, 60 miles north of Orléans. It is moving east, not south. East toward the Seine, east toward Paris's encirclement, east toward the operational objectives that the exploitation's momentum has been producing and that the German defensive system has been failing to arrest. It will not come to Orléans. It does not need Orléans as a military objective because the Loire Valley's German garrison does not represent the organized resistance that requires the Third Army to divert from its primary axis. The resistance fighters and the French population of Orléans, the city that was burned by the English in the 100 Years' War and liberated by Joan of Arc and that has spent 4 years under German occupation, are the only military pressure the garrison will face. And the resistance fighters are making clear to the garrison commander in the communications that the FFI and the garrison have been conducting since August 14 that they are willing to accept a surrender that the garrison can conduct with the procedural dignity that the German military's honor code requires. The garrison commander makes the calculation that the situation presents to him with a directness that only complete operational isolation can produce. The American army is not coming. The German army is not coming. The French population is outside the garrison perimeter, in numbers, whose political significance has been growing since August 8th, and his 2,400 men are inside a fortified position whose holding serves no military purpose that the German military has been able to communicate to him in 10 days of attempted radio contact. He surrenders to the FFI commander for the Orléans sector on August 18th. Orléans is liberated. The liberation is achieved not by American firepower, but by the operational momentum of an American army 60 miles away, whose trajectory has made the German garrison's continued resistance an exercise in holding ground for a command structure that has stopped giving orders. The legacy of the German rearguard surrenders in the Loire Valley is a legacy whose strategic significance the Allied command recognized at the time, and whose analytical significance the German military's own post-war assessments acknowledged, with the professional candor of men who had been inside the experience, and who understood what had happened to them. The operational fact is this. In the 2 weeks between August 8 and August 25, German forces totaling approximately 20,000 men in the Loire Valley sector surrendered, evacuated, or disintegrated as organized military formations without being engaged by any significant American combat force in the fighting that military theory projects as the necessary mechanism for the reduction of a military force of this size. The American units that eventually reached the Loire Valley, elements of the 15th Corps and 12th Corps operating on the Third Army's southern flank as the exploitation's rear area security force, arrived at garrison towns that the FFI had already secured and where the German garrison had already laid down its weapons, at river crossings that had already been cleared of German defensive elements, at the bridges whose demolition the German garrisons had failed to execute because the execution required orders that had not arrived, and at the administrative apparatus of German occupation, whose collapse had already been accomplished by the specific combination of patterns. Operational momentum 60 to 100 miles to the north and east, and the garrison commander's decision that the situation imposed on them was the only rational one available to a military unit, without communication, without orders, and without a command structure that was functioning in any sense that the word functioning is designed to describe. The strategic consequence of these surrenders is not primarily the reduction of German strength in the direct numerical sense. 20,000 men removed from the German order of battle is significant, but not decisive at the scale of the 1944 Western Front's operations, where the German army's total strength in France runs to hundreds of thousands, and where the loss of 20,000 rear area troops, however complete, does not by itself alter the campaign's fundamental outcome. The strategic consequence is the demonstration it provides, the specific and documented proof that the exploitation phase operational tempo can do to the opponent's will to resist without the opponent being militarily defeated in the conventional sense. Of what Patton has been arguing since the Louisiana maneuvers and demonstrating since August 1st, that the speed of the advance is itself a weapon, that the psychological effect of operational encirclement without physical contact is a form of combat power, and that an army that moves faster than the opponent's command system can process the information about its movement has already defeated the opponent at the level that matters most. The German rearguard units in the Loire Valley did not surrender because Patton's army defeated them. They surrendered because Patton's army made them irrelevant. And irrelevance, the specific and complete experience of being a military unit in a military situation, without orders, without communications, without the context that gives military action its meaning, is a form of defeat whose psychological weight the German garrison commanders in the Loire Valley towns discovered is heavier than the weight of a direct military assault. They surrendered before the Americans arrived, because waiting for the Americans to arrive had become indistinguishable from waiting for a command structure that had already dissolved and a military situation that had already been decided. And the garrison commander at Vendôme, and the colonel at Orléans, and the dozens of smaller unit commanders across the Loire Valley understood, in the specific and human way that soldiers understand the truth that military theory sometimes obscures, that the war they had been positioned to fight had moved on without them, and that the most accurate thing a soldier could do in August 1944, in the Loire Valley, was put down his weapon and acknowledge what had already happened.